chapter 5. Matthew 5. We're back to the Sermon on the Mount. Now, Jesus has been giving us instructions for how the kingdom, the millennial kingdom that he's offering to the Jews will begin, what the responsibilities will be if they choose to accept. Now, last week he hit the high note of his message, talking about the law. And from that point on, his message starts delving into the law and making slight changes from the Old Testament to what he's going to require in the millennium. Matthew 5, verse 21. Matthew 5, 21 to 22. Now, some of this we've covered before, and we'll kind of skip through. Won't give you a full-fledged explanation, but we'll give you enough that if you missed it, you'll know what we're talking about. Matthew 5:21. Ye have heard that it was said of them of old time, Thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Okay, he says, whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. Okay, that's not something doctrinally that we're worried about right now. Now, if you kill somebody, you are in danger of going to jail. You're in danger of going before a judge, but that doesn't have anything to do with spiritual matters. You're not going before God as a judge. One day they will. If you kill somebody, you'll appear before a heavenly representation of judicial system. Let's find out what the judgment is. Numbers 35. Now he said, whosoever shall kill. Now remember, that's one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill. Numbers 35. Thou shalt not kill is, of course, one of the 10 commandments. And a lot of people jump off the deep end on that word kill. There is a difference between killing somebody in war and somebody dying accidentally at your hand and doing it premeditated. Just because someone dies doesn't mean that you're in danger of the council, and we'll see God's definition of it. Numbers 35, verse 15. He makes a differentiation between killing someone accidentally and doing it premeditated. One is murder and one is not. Verse 15. These 6 cities shall be a refuge, both for the children of Israel and for the stranger, for the sojourner among them. That everyone that killeth any person unawares, that is, they didn't intend to. Maybe they pushed him off a cliff and said, oops, I accidentally did that. May flee thither. And if you smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. Okay, so he says, look, if they did it on purpose, if they intended to kill the man, then they're a murderer. Now, the reason he's got to put that in here is that person is going to do what I just did. They're going to say it was an accident. Mm-hmm. So just because you showed up in the city of refuge doesn't mean you're safe. There's still an inquiry. Verse 16. And if he smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he smite him with a throwing stone, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he smite him with a hand weapon of wood, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. That's 3 times. I think we got the point. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. Okay, now this is a different system than what we do nowadays. It says the nearest of kin, or someone affected through that murder, gets to put you to death. So we do something similar. We allow the family to come and view an execution. If you're given the electric chair or a lethal injection, there's a viewing room. and the family of the people affected get to watch. This is biblical. Verse 20. No, that's not where I am. Where am I? 19? Okay. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meet him, he shall slay him. But if he thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by laying wait, that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hand that he die, he hath smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. So there's a big difference between killing someone accidentally and murder. God is very plain on murder. And he agrees with the death penalty.
And even the person that's revenging, if he does it out of hatred, can fall into that category. It says the revenger himself.
No, that's the revenger laying wait. It has to be done through the legal system.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If he doesn't do it
right.
the right way,
yes, if it does not go through the proper channels, it's murder.
It's a murderer too.
Right. Verse 24. Then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the revenger of blood according to these judgments. So there's a judicial system set up. So this is not a new concept. When Jesus says you'll be in danger of the judgment, the children of Israel understand that because it's been set in stone from way back. So they understand the judgment. But we're going to see it's talking about something future that is a little more abstract. Look at Deuteronomy 19. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. God is very deliberate in how he sets up a judicial system. And he's done it perfectly. You can count on that. I'm glad that I'm not put in charge of it or had to go through the trial and error of learning what to do and what not to do. God laid it all out here. Deuteronomy 19, verse 15. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for sin, in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of 2 witnesses, or the mouth of 3 witnesses, shall the matter be established. So he said, this is not going to be a platform to get revenge. It's not going to be a 1-800 tattle on your neighbor. We're going to have legitimate witnesses here. And then he goes on and talks about a false witness. Verse 18, and the judges shall make diligent inquisition. Okay, so there has to be an investigation process. Verse 19, then shall you do unto him as he thought to have done unto his brother. So if you find somebody who's doing this maliciously, he gets exactly what he intended to give. So that's one thing that's missing in America. There's only, I think the last time I checked, there's only 4 states that have what's called a Retributions Act. That is, if you press charges on someone, a felony, and you've done it maliciously, you should be held accountable for it. Florida is not one, but they don't have it, Florida, because it doesn't pay. Yeah. But then they don't have to pay.
You can actually get nailed for nuisance doing that. California is famous for that.
Yes, it's state to state. But that comes from Bible. Right here is where that law originated. God says, I believe in a Retribution Act. And it needs to be investigated thoroughly. Now, there's a big difference between God and our legal system. God knows. And he communicated directly with the priests. So there wasn't anybody getting around anything. It was fact. Now, in the millennium, it's going to be the same way. And he's going to be setting up judges to judge. And that's what he's talking about here. In Matthew, on this Sermon on the Mount, you're going to find parallel passages in the book of Matthew. We're in Matthew 5 now. If you run to Matthew 18 and 19, you're going to get further information, more details on the same thing he's talking about in Matthew 5. So let's go to Matthew 19. Matthew 19, verse 17. Matthew 19:17. And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. He saith unto him, Which? Jesus said, now this is one of the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments says, Thou shalt not kill. Notice Jesus' definition of killing. Thou shalt do no murder. Okay, so accidental death is not something that forces you to be hauled before the judicial system to be put to death yourself. Jesus further defines it here as murder. Okay, back to Matthew 5. Matthew 5:22. Matthew 5:22. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Okay, none of us are worried about saying Raca to anybody because you don't even know what that means. You're not. If you did that, it's because you intended to be in danger of it. That's Greek. So none of us here speak Greek. There's going to be a time where it's going to be the language again. And it's going to mean exactly what it says. If you say that to someone, and it'll be in the millennium, when there are no fools. Fools are to be put to death immediately by the council. So in the millennium, when everybody is speaking one language, he says where does it say that? Y'all have to look it up. He says, I'll return to them a pure language. So God's going to give the earth one single language in the millennium. And when he does, it's either going to be Greek or Hebrew, probably Hebrew. Now, look at 1 John 3:15. The only place we can go to find information on calling someone a fool being a bad thing is tribulation passages. Something that deals doctrinally with after the church age. 1 John chapter 3. The book of 1 John, while you can get spiritual truths, doctrinally is in the tribulation. 1 John 3:15. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. Okay, so he's guilty of this judgment, not by having killed someone. Now it's turned, instead of being a physical act, it's a internal thing. So it just gets harder and harder. You better get saved now while you can. You get James 1. In the tribulation, God's no longer striving with man. He's no longer playing. His long suffering is just about over with. And he's nipping things right in the bud. James 1:15. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. As in killing somebody, murdering somebody, hating somebody in your heart. So, God's not going to put up with it. The closer you get toward the church being gone from here, the less patience God is going to have with sin. So he says, look, I know where that sin leads. That lust, anger, it's going to lead to murder. And especially in the tribulation, where you get bonus points for doing it. So he says, look, I'm going to nip it in the bud. You hate somebody in your heart, I'm going to consider it murder. And if the state won't take care of it, God does. He says, back to Matthew 5. Matthew 5:22, he says, hello. He says, come on in. You're fine. He says, It says, whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause. Okay, there's a reason he says without a cause. And it's a good thing he does. Because you can be angry. Yeah, I thought about doing that.
She just did it.
No, that's what I thought of. I'll make her do it. No. I think we've got you need an extra chair? We got it? We're good. Perfect. He says, Matthew 5:22. Whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause. It's not simply being angry at somebody because you have a good reason for it. It's without a cause. It's a satanic thing. You're just angry because you don't match. Your spirits are different. The world is filled with violence from Satan. He's the originator of violence. Look at Genesis. Now I'm going off track, so I'm going to have to find the verse. Genesis, where is that? 6, where the world was there? No, yeah, Genesis 6. The earth was filled with violence through them. Genesis 6:11. Yes. Okay. Genesis 6, verse 11. It says, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Okay. How did it get filled with violence? Back to verse 2. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose. Okay? So that's where it comes from. It's a supernatural being inhabiting a body. That's satanic. That's where violence originates in your Bible. And it follows all the way through. Most references to violence is going to be a satanic context. Okay, so he says, whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause. It needs to be without a cause so that you identify it as being non-rational. The devil does not have ration. There's no reasoning ability in him. The only way you get a sound mind is from Jesus Christ.
Amen.
So just the opposite of that is loony. Yeah. Now you'll find some versions that will remove the without a cause, and you don't want to give that any time of day because they've just shown their hand. Look at Mark 3. Mark 3, verse 3. Mark 3, verse 3 to 5. And he said unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he had looked around about on them with anger. Okay? So Jesus had anger. Was he in danger of hellfire? I think not. Being grieved for the hardness of their hearts. Okay, let's look at it again. This is how you know when you see things that contradict each other. It doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. It means your understanding's wrong. You've got to fit it where it belongs, historically, doctrinally, and dispensationally. Ephesians 4:26. Ephesians 4:26. Now here's a church age reference to this anger thing. Ephesians 4:26. Be ye angry. Okay, he's telling someone to be angry. Okay, in Matthew 5, he's not saying be angry. He's saying just the opposite. Be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Okay, so there is a way to be angry without sin. And Jesus demonstrated it in, where was that? Mark 3. Look at Jude 1. Well, only one chapter in Jude, so. Jude, verse 23. Jude, verse 23. You can have the bag, give me the money. Jude 1:23
Red light.
says, "And others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted by the flesh." So there he's telling you to hate something. If you have no hatred, you have no real love.
Where are you at?
Jude, it's right before Revelation.
Jude, what, please?
Jude chapter 25. When you find that, let me know. Jude's only got one chapter. Jude, verse 23.
Okay.
Okay, so he's saying there that you're supposed to hate some things. If you're the type that says, "I don't ever hate anything," then you don't love anything either. If you really love something, if someone attacks that thing you love, you hate. Justly. Just like God loves righteousness. So that means he must hate sin and iniquity. And he does. So that's where you find the balance with God. God hates because he does love so much. So if you're going to attack, if you become an offense to him, he hates it. He hates you. He says, back to Matthew 5:22. It says, "But whosoever shall say, 'Thou fool,' shall be in danger of hellfire." Okay, well, that doesn't apply to our age either. Look at Luke 24. This is Jesus speaking. Luke 24. So we've seen so far that this anger issue doesn't apply. And now we're going to see that this statement about calling someone a fool doesn't apply. So it does apply somewhere. Just not, we'll see, to us. Luke 24:25. This is Jesus. He says, "Then he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken." Okay, that's Jesus Christ himself calling these people fools. Okay, so obviously it didn't apply to him. Once you study this whole chapter in context, you see it's him setting up a constitution for the millennial kingdom. And that's where everything applies literally. Look at 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15:36. This is Paul. Now, Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. He's current in the church age. That's our time right now. First Corinthians 15, verse 36. Paul says, "Thou fool." Whoops. Thought you weren't supposed to call anybody that. He does. "That which thou hast sown is not quickened except it die." So obviously it doesn't apply in the church age, and it didn't apply in Jesus' age at the time. So it will apply somewhere. It applies in the millennium.
This is who speaking?
Paul, the Apostle Paul. Okay, so doctrinally, this whole thing applies millennium because it's Jesus Christ giving them his platform that he's running on. Just like the candidates come forward and they tell you why you want to vote for them. This is what they'll do when they get in office, and it's nothing they say they're going to do. Back to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 23. Matthew 5:23. "Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Okay, this is, of course, not applicable to the church age, and I'm going to show you why. Who brings an offering to a gift? Or a gift to an altar. I cannot speak. A gift to an altar nowadays. Does anybody?
Catholics?
Yeah, man.
You
Yeah.
do it that you ask.
Uh-huh. It's not doctrinally for now. The Jews did in the Old Testament, didn't they? They brought all of their things that they were giving, either the tithes, or they were bringing a free will offering. Whatever they were offering, it came to an altar. There's going to be an altar set up again. There is no altar right now because the Jews don't have a temple. Temple Mount is occupied. One day it'll be cleared and they'll be able to have their temple again. Now that one will be destroyed, and then Jesus will set up a millennial one. Look at Exodus 30. Now you can make spiritual application, but it's not doctrinal. Exodus 30, verse 1. Thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon, of shittim wood shalt thou make it. Okay, this is the altar of incense. This is inside the tabernacle. Our equivalent, incense, is prayers. You'll find that in Revelation. Prayer is incense. So, if you're offering prayer as an offering, how can you pray to God without fixing an issue you know between you and other individuals? You can apply that spiritually. That's not literally what it's talking about. Leviticus 17. Here's where the altar comes into play with a gift. Leviticus 17. Leviticus 17, verse 11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for your soul. Okay, so that's you bringing an offering to the altar. The priest would actually kill it and burn it and do all the stuff in Exodus and Leviticus. They talk about how you have to prepare the meat. But that was an offering there. So he's saying at this offering, at this altar right here, when you bring it, if you remember, hey, me and Buddy are having a issue with the boundaries on our property. He's saying, leave it there. And you notice, isn't that a weird thing to say? He didn't say, take your offering and go back and wait to give it until you've got things right. He said, no, leave it. So the priest gets to eat it. You're out on both accounts if you don't go get the thing right. You get no blessing and you lost your offering.
And after you make it right, you gotta come back and bring another offering.
Well, no, the offering is already there. You'll just get the blessing.
Oh.
You'll get atonement. The atonement that is supposed to be for your soul. The offering of the blood. Okay, back to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 27. Now, Jesus is relating law. Now, he started out telling them that he didn't come to break the law, he came to fulfill the law. And now he's going to go through and start explaining laws to them that they should have already known. Verse 27. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to us either. We're not worried about this physical body committing a sin and us going to hell. God's blood atonement, if you've accepted that, has cleansed you from all unrighteousness. Okay? So nothing this body could do would be greater than the payment Jesus made. The only way a sin you could commit would send you to hell after you've accepted Christ's payment is if he didn't pay enough. That would be saying the blood of Jesus Christ was not enough to cover this sin. Okay, so you can't lose your salvation. So this applies to someone who could. Okay, that'll be tribulation and millennium. Verse 31. I'm skipping through because I'm on page 5 of 12. And let's see how. Matthew 5:31. It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery. Okay, this is the Old Testament issue of if you wanted to divorce your wife, there were a set of rules of when you could and when you couldn't, and who could marry her and who couldn't. Jesus is making it clear here in this passage that adultery is a case of legitimate divorce. You can divorce for adultery. He gives 3 cases that adultery works, or that divorce works for. Look at another statement parallel to this in Mark 10. Mark 10, verse 11 and 12. You'll find people use this verse without using the one in Matthew. If they want to tell you you're only allowed to be married once for life, they'll only use the reference in Mark. And I'll show you why. And he said unto them, whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another committeth adultery against her. And if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. What's missing in that passage is Jesus saying it was okay to do, saving for the cause of fornication. Because Mark is not giving you the full statement on the matter. Anytime you're dealing with a complicated issue, you need to go to the clearest passage on it. The clearest passage on marriage, divorce, and remarriage is not in the Gospels. It's from Paul, church age, 1 Corinthians 7. 1 Corinthians 7, Paul gives you 8 steps that explain marriage, divorce, and remarriage. First Corinthians 7, verse 7 to 8. The first step is don't do it. This is Paul. First step, he says, is stay single. For I would that all men were even as myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that. I say therefore unto the unmarried widow, it is good if they abide even as I. So he's saying, look, it is a gift from God if you're supposed to have a wife. So in that case, you should have a wife. But if it's not of God, stay single. Know before you marry that God has said do it. But you should be doing that with everything, not just marriage, but especially marriage. And you find in Matthew 19, verse 12. Matthew 19, 12. This is the same thought. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Now, able means if you feel that's your call from God to be single, then stay single. Otherwise, do whatever your call from God is. God calls many people to be married. Okay? He does not call everybody to be single. He obviously called Paul to be single. So he said there, and he'll explain why he thinks that it's better to be single than to be married. Back to 1 Corinthians 7.
Rachel has a question.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so I know there's some people who are really tight on girls have to always get married, that's what they need to do, and I know that I've read, I think it was in Timothy where Titus, where it was the older women were supposed to teach the younger
Younger
women
women.
to be keepers of the house.
Mhm.
Is this eunuchs only applying to men, or is it?
It would apply to both.
Okay.
Of course, a eunuch is a man. However, the principle is the same. If you are to marry, that's one of each. So, some women are called to not marry. And the farther we go down, the more clear it'll become. 1 Corinthians 7:32. Here's why. 1 Corinthians 7:32. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Here's the reason why. If you're single, and God has called you to be single, you can dedicate 100% of your time and energy to serving God. A married person cannot do that. A married person, and he'll go on and show us why the farther we get along. That's step one. Step one is make sure you're supposed to marry. Don't just do it because you think it would make things easier, because that won't be the case. Step two, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 9. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 9. Step 2. If you have an overwhelming desire to be married, cases are God's calling you. Verse 9. But if they cannot contain, let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn. Now, burn doesn't mean in hell. It means with lust. And you find the explanation of that in Romans 1:27, but I'm trying to go fast tonight. Okay, so step 2. If you feel like you're called to marry, marry. Okay? That's simple. Step 3. What if something happens? Verse 10, 1 Corinthians 7:10. And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. Okay, so he's saying don't get divorced. Once you get married, don't get divorced. Be just as strict on yourself prior to getting married as you are once you are married. Prior to getting married, your focus was on serving the Lord until he says, hey buddy, I want you to get married. I got somebody picked out for you. I need you to rule over some, no.
Red light.
Don't bother me. She keeps thinking I ran a red light, but
I saw it with my own eyes.
she's only seen one. I run so many per day. So anyway, so if you are married, consider that God's will, period. Now don't divorce, because now you're stepping out of God's will. If he called you to be married, don't break it. Stay married. In Matthew 19:8, I told you Matthew 19 and also in chapter 18, they parallel this Sermon on the Mount. He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Okay, so God's perfect plan is for a married person to never divorce. Okay? Now there are exceptions, and we'll cover them. We saw one already in Matthew 5, saving for the cause of fornication. Okay, the next step is, let's say you're married and one of the two of you gets saved and the other one's lost. What happens? You're heading in separate directions. That's trying to join the Spirit of God and the devil. Unless you have things in common, it's going to be hard to live together. So here's his advice on that. Verse 13, 1 Corinthians 7:13. His advice is, the saved partner should still not seek a divorce. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. Okay? So, unless the unsaved partner decides to go, you stick it out. You stay. You consider it a marriage from God. But if verse 15 and 16. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. Okay, so if your unsaved partner, husband, wife, whatever it is, decides we're going separate directions and we don't even think alike, I'm out of here. He said at that point, don't even try to stop them. Let them go. That's pretty tough talk, and you don't hear many people talk about it, but that's what it says. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such a case, but God hath called us to peace. For what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? Okay, so if the saved individual in the marriage will stick it out, he's saying, you don't know if maybe God's going to use you down the road, if you stick it out, to bring that person to Christ. So the reason you're married might not have anything to do with getting along for a while. But he says if you can stick it out because God will use it. God views that as you doing it for him. In 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2, he says, likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, that would be the husband, he doesn't care about obeying the word, that they may, without the word, be won by the conversation of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. The saved spouse, if she will stay and remain faithful in the marriage, God gets in it. And he'll do something that's supernatural. And he says, if you will stay in that situation, even though you're not on the same brainwave. What?
Abigail and Nabal just came to mind. God intervened.
Yeah. No. We'll get to them in a minute. If you'll stay in there, then it becomes something supernatural. It's not normal. It's going against flesh. Here's a cliff note for you. Anytime you do something that is contrary to your flesh, God gives you a reward for it. So if you're staying in your marriage with an unsaved person against your flesh, what you really want to do, God will give you a reward for it. Now the reward may be he'll chasten your husband till he has to, or wife, till they have to give up or get out. That's the way he may do it. But it'll hasten things along. And then in 2 Corinthians 5:11, he says, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord we persuade men. Okay, so God can be a terrorist. We think is ISIS. That's the English for ISIS is.
Is.
We're not Arab. It's is. And I trust also are made manifest in your conscience. Okay, so if you'll get on the same team as God, and somebody's opposing you, and you're on the same team as God, they're opposing God. And God will rectify things in a hurry. He'll bring things to light, just like he did with Nabal. Okay, so what happens if you get divorced? The unbelieving leaves. Okay, let's find out what it says. 1 Corinthians 7:27.
1 Corinthians
1 Corinthians 7, verse 27. If the unbelieving has departed, and now you're single. 1 Corinthians 7:27. Art thou bound to a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. So, if you're divorced and you've followed all the rules up to this point, don't seek to redo it. Don't look for a husband. Stay single. It starts back at point 1. Remember, point 1 was don't seek for a mate unless God tells you to go get one. Okay? Now you're single again. We've started right back to the beginning. Don't go looking for another person. Now look at Proverbs 18:22.
You know, that's a hard thing for a woman or a man emotionally in this world, because it is, it's been for a long time that you're supposed to grow up, get married, have children, go to school, get your profession, get married, have children, and do all these things. And emotionally, especially after you've been in a relationship, when that relationship has been severed, even if you've gone through all the rules the right way, the way you're supposed to, you're going to have an empty spot, because we're human. Even though you know that the Lord can and will take up and fill everything and take care of all of it.
It's the same as tithe. It's the same as fasting. It's all done on purpose. When you fast, you don't rob yourself of food and think that's going to get God's attention. God could care less whether or not you eat. If you harm yourself, go harm yourself. How does that get his attention? The reason a fast will work is if you use your flesh against itself. If you say, I'm going to fast, and every time a hunger pain hits me, I'm going to use that as an alarm clock to remind me of the subject matter I'm fasting for. And then you spend that time praying or directing attention to God on a specific subject matter. Now you've got his attention because you've denied the flesh and put him in charge. The same thing with the marriage issue. If you've separated, now when the devil brings, or flesh brings back, I really need a mate here, then you redirect it. God, you've put it here and you've promised to be my mate. And then you redirect it. He says, a brother is born for adversity. Okay? That's trouble. And there's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Okay? So the friend that sticks closer than a brother is Jesus Christ. If in that situation you'll quit looking for a brother a long way away and take the friend that's closer than a brother, you'll be better off. Now, this is a spiritual thing. It's not going to make sense physically and logically. It has to be learned through experience. It's like telling somebody to live by faith. Faith cannot be explained. It has to be experienced. And there's really no way I can explain it. It's just until you've stepped out on nothing because God says step, and you say, I'm trusting you, you can't explain it. And that's going to be all the principles he gives you in the Bible that go against your logic. That means there's a supernatural reason for it, and he'll give you supernatural grace to get there. Okay, the sixth step. We were in Proverbs 18:22. He says, whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Okay, so you get favor from God if you find a wife that God's got for you. Now, if he doesn't have one for you, you'll find his favor because you've dedicated yourself to him. You'll be constantly in his favor. But he's saying, I'm not going to ignore the fact that just because I have some people designated to be 100% my servant, they're automatically going to get favor. because they're working for me 24/7. If I've called some people to marry, they cannot put the time in that someone dedicated as a single person can put in. So because of that, I'm going to overlook that, and I'm going to give them favor, regardless of how much they've studied, regardless of how much work they put in. So you get a little benefit there. Now, let's say we've started back at the beginning, remember? Don't seek to be married. But if you can't contain, get married. Okay, God's saying, hey, okay, I really want you to get married. You know, your brain's a little light and we need to get a man in here. No.
I think you forgot you were outnumbered on that.
Hey, well, my wife's out of the room, so I'm good.
You're going to get tattled on.
1 Corinthians 7:28. 1 Corinthians 7:28. He says, but, and if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Okay, if the unsaved spouse leaves, and you do end up remarrying, that's not a sin. Just know for sure you're supposed to do it. Yeah, that's 1 Corinthians 7:28. The reason is, in Amos 3:3 says, can two walk together except they be agreed? So you need to go back to the beginning. Okay, now I'm single. God, do you want me to be married? Okay, remember the first one busted up because it wasn't God's will to begin with? You've got an unsaved spouse? Okay, so don't do that again. Learn from it. If he does intend you to have a saved spouse that he will marry you to, then it's a good thing. Otherwise, you've joined yourself with someone you cannot walk with. Two cannot walk together if they're not agreed. It's impossible. Step 7, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 39. If you do remarry, it has to be a Christian. We don't want to go back through the same mess again, and y'all don't want me to add another page to this. 1 Corinthians 7:39. He says you're at liberty to be married only in the Lord. To the phrase only in the Lord, that's only another Christian. That's God giving his stamp of approval on it. You know, God does not marry animals. Animals don't get married. Okay? There's only one thing on this earth that gets married, it's humans. And it's only saved. God doesn't consider lost people married. That's something God joins together, not man. Okay, step 8. 1 Corinthians 7:28. That is not the right verse. 1 Corinthians. He says.
It's a hard compost, Toby wants that one.
Amen.
1 Corinthians 7. I gotta find it now. 1 Corinthians 7. He says, nevertheless, in the flesh, you will have problems or something.
No, he says that in 28.
28?
Yeah, he does at the end of it.
Yes. Nevertheless, in the flesh, nevertheless, ye shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. Okay, so you can remarry. That's not saying you can't remarry, but he's saying that if a second marriage is bound for trouble, period, even if it is with another believer. You're going to inherit some problems you would not have inherited had you stayed single.
I'm sorry.
You're going to inherit some problems you would have avoided had you stayed single.
Even if it's God
Correct.
ordained?
Correct. Let's read the verse. Verse 28. But, and if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. That is, if she marries somebody who's been remarried, or been divorced. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh. But I spare you. Okay? A second marriage is doomed to have problems simply from the fact they've been married before. Why? Because you come in with preconceived notions of how another person is going to respond. You come in with a mindset, you've not grown up together, you've not gotten to know each other together, so you come in bringing baggage from the previous person that you've now applied to a new person, and vice versa. So you're going to have trouble, and that's just a promise. Blessed promises. Okay, the reasons for marriage. Reasons for marriage, good question. No. Reasons for divorce. Death divorces you, right? If someone dies, you're no longer married. That's obvious, right? Romans chapter 7, verse 1 to about 15. He explains that whole situation. The brethren, I speak to them that know the law, you know, that a woman is bound by the law to her husband so long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she's loosed from the law of her husband. Okay, so if he's dead, do what?
I said you shouldn't really be saying that.
I shouldn't be saying that?
Yeah, like, because if he's,
Giving you some ideas. So if he's dead, now you are divorced, and that's God approved divorce. It's time to remarry or go through the whole thing. Divorce, if it's done legitimately, according to the rules we just read, an unsaved spouse leaves, that God considers that a divorce. Okay? Then that's a legitimate divorce. There's nothing wrong with that. You're free to marry again if God chooses to. The only other exception God gives is what we read in Matthew, fornication. God is very specific that he hates adultery and fornication. Notice something that changes here. Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7, verse 6. Remember, the Old Testament was all about do this, don't do that. Now, there is some attention given to attitude, but not a whole lot. Jesus changes the game. He comes in and he says it has to do with your mind. The actions that your hands and your body commits are connected with what you thought. Remember, he says if you look on a woman to lust after her, I consider that you've already committed adultery with her. So Jesus is making it more strenuous, not easier. He's making it harder. Romans 7, verse 6. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of the Spirit, not oldness of the letter. Okay, well, which one's easier? Neither. Neither is easy. The oldness of the letter is do this, don't do that. I don't care what your attitude is. You're going to clean your room and be happy about it whether you like it or not. That type of thing. That's the oldness. The newness is if you've not cleaned your room and you were singing as you did it, then, no allowance for you. So the attitude has to accompany the action. But in the Old Testament, it only required the action. Let's watch Jesus change and show you the difference between action and attitude. The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Matthew 5. Verse 21, he says, thou shalt not kill. That was Old Testament law. That was a physical event. Verse 22, but I say, whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Okay, so he's linking an attitude, an action, a mental thought with a physical action. You cannot compete in that realm without being a new creature, without God himself enabling you to do it. So this is designed to be a more strenuous schoolmaster than even the Old Testament was to begin with. If I tell you you have to obey the commandments, what's the standard response? Because I'm pretty good. I've never killed anybody. I mean, that's what they say. So then you say, you follow it up, you say, have you ever hated anybody? Well, Jesus said when he gave the commandments, if you hate somebody, I consider it the same. So he came to turn the volume up on the schoolmaster. You're supposed to hate what he hates. Mm-hmm. Correct. Individuals, though. It's a person, a brother. Okay, look at verse 27. He said, thou shalt not commit adultery. Now, verse 28. But I say unto you, whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Now, that's in his heart. That's not grounds for divorce. That's something known between an individual and God. And that's something God judges. Now, what is done physically that is known in the real world, that the real world is responsible for judging. And if we don't, then God does. So, he still gives the grounds for divorce as fornication, not lust. Look at verse 31. He says, if you want to put your wife away, give her a writing of divorcement. Verse 32, but I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. That is, he's got a liability as well. He's responsible. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. If it was done improperly to begin with, you're all culpable. However you say that word. You know what I mean?
No culpable.
Yeah,
They're all in trouble.
that's right. There you go.
Red light.
So, when Jesus is questioned by the Pharisees in Matthew 19, he's talking to men who know the law. He's talking to Jews who are teaching the law. They're responsible for the continued education of the Old Testament law. And he tells them that Moses would allow divorce for many causes.
Wait.
And he did.
So if the man leaves the woman because he wants to be with another woman, but the woman didn't want him to leave, but he left her.
Which one's
So he's
saved?
divorced her because he wants to be with another woman. The woman he left is in trouble because he did that?
Correct. Did she remarry?
Is this New Testament or Old Testament?
Good-
Where's he at?
Good
Where's
question.
Christian at?
I don't know. It's your hypothetical, so you tell me.
Because
Just gonna throw that one up in the air and just see where it lands.
That's
so
right.
if he divorces her,
If he
legally
divorces
in
her.
today's age,
Okay.
if I was married
Okay.
and my husband fell in love with somebody else and divorced me legally by man's law
Mm-hmm.
to be with that other woman, I'm supposed to stay single for the rest of my life.
No, you're supposed to follow the rules in 1 Corinthians 7.
Because we divorced properly. Even though he left because he wanted to fornicate.
Correct. Correct. Once fornication has transpired, either party, it's grounds for termination.
But what I'm saying is, he doesn't do it. He wants to do it, so he's going
The
to
act-
divorce me.
The
before he
act,
does it.
the act is what God considers the cause for divorce, not a piece of paper. The fornication on his part legitimized divorce. The act of fornication causes God to say there's grounds for divorce, regardless of what paperwork you filled out before
The
who.
act of him wanting to leave to do that.
You've got it out of order. If you're God, when do you say, now we have grounds for divorce? After the act. It doesn't matter what paperwork you filled out. You could have gone before a phony judge. It doesn't
But what if
matter.
he
God's the
divorces
real
her
judge.
first? Legally, in today's age, I'm
God
married,
doesn't look at your law.
and he divorces me.
God
So
doesn't
we're
care about,
divorced.
God doesn't
Then he
care.
goes to the
God
woman.
does not care if your judge said you're divorced.
Okay.
Because what God joins together, let not man put asunder. Man has not put it asunder until fornication arises, and then man has proved I've put it asunder.
I actually have something that could work with this to kind of make a little more sense. Is in the military, they said nothing's happened. It doesn't matter if it's rumor or anything. Nothing has happened until you have first-hand proof. Like you caught it in the act.
Right.
So it's kind of like that. Until you have it in the act, nothing has happened, and it can't be undone. But that's the best kind of way to translate what's going on is until the act has happened. It's not official. It can't
So
be.
she
It can't be
has
grounds.
she has, even if he legally divorced her, she still
Correct.
is married in God's eyes until he commits the act.
Yes.
Then she's
Yes.
divorced.
Yes.
I got
Exactly.
you.
Yes. God is not subject to your laws. The laws are subject to God.
Oh heck, I didn't even get that far. He was already doing it.
Now, here's the question. If you'll notice something, I'm gonna cover this, and then I think we'll be done. But in 1 Corinthians 7, when he's giving you all the causes for divorce, notice something in there. The woman is never allowed to file for divorce.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah, what is up with that?
I didn't file.
Isn't it?
No, I had to.
The man can divorce anytime he feels like it.
John wrote this. I know John wrote this.
Now, the man can divorce in Romans chapter 7. It's always the man giving her a writing of divorcement. The female never gives a writing of divorcement. When it talks about a woman leaving, it says, let her depart. That is, she leaves, but she doesn't institute a legal document. There's a reason for that, and the reason is awesome. Because you are a picture of a woman. Everybody who's saved in this age is the bride of Christ. And you don't have the right to divorce Jesus Christ. Even if you decide, okay, now I'm tired of being a Christian, I don't want to do this anymore. You don't have the right to divorce Christ. You're still married.
So pretty much it's all his fault.
Yeah.
I'm liking this. This is what I'm getting.
Correct. Well,
Like it was.
We now have biblical proof. It is the dude's fault.
well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. The man will not do wrong. The male will not do wrong. Will Christ divorce you because you decide you don't like him? Will Christ send you to hell because you decide you don't like him? Okay, so the man will never do wrong. That's the picture.
No.
That's the picture, but that's not reality in the
Yeah.
flesh. That's what he's
Yeah.
saying. That's the perfect picture. but
Correct,
that's not
correct.
reality.
All right, that'll do it for tonight. The notes will have the notes will have lots. There's lots more info on the notes than what we covered, so it'll be probably a little clearer, and you might get 2 or 3 lessons out of what's in the notes. Yeah.
I'm like, I still.
All I heard is I can't do wrong.